Lyra had been a captain in the Galactic Empire fleet for 70 years, and she thought she had seen everything the universe could show her. But today was going to prove her wrong in ways she could never imagine, and it would change her life and the lives of billions of people across the galaxy forever. She stood on the bridge of her ship, the Silver Wind, and looked out at the endless stars that filled the darkness of space, and beside her stood her two dragons, Ember and Frost, who were her companions and friends and protectors for the last 100 years since she had found them as babies on a dying world. Ember was red like fire, and his scales glowed with inner heat, and he was fierce and brave, and always ready to fight any enemy that threatened Lyra or the crew. And Frost was white like snow, and her scales sparkled like ice crystals, and she was calm and wise and could sense danger before anyone else could. The Silver Wind was patrolling the outer edge of Empire space where the known galaxy ended and the unknown began. And this was a quiet posting where nothing much happened because no one came out this far except for the occasional trader or explorer, and Lyra liked it that way because she had seen enough war in her long life. Her crew was small but loyal, and they were all elves like her except for one Zinther engineer who kept the engines running, and they trusted her completely because she had saved their lives many times in battles against pirates and rebels and hostile aliens. Luna was her second officer and closest friend, and she had served with Lyra for 40 years, and knew her better than anyone, except maybe the dragons. And right now, Luna was sitting at the scanning station and doing routine checks of the surrounding space. Everything was normal and peaceful until suddenly the scanning equipment started making sounds. It had never made before, and Luna looked at the screens with confusion on her face. And then her confusion turned to worry, and she called out to Lyra in a voice that was tight with tension. Lyra walked over quickly and asked what was wrong, and Luna pointed at the screen and said, there was something out there. Something big that was moving toward them at incredible speed, and the scanners could not identify what it was made of or where it came from. The elf captain felt her heart start to beat faster, because in all her years of service, she had never encountered anything the Empire scanners could not identify, and the Empire had the most advanced technology in the galaxy, or at least that was what everyone believed. She ordered the crew to go to alert status and to charge the defensive shields and weapons just in case, and everyone moved quickly to their positions because they could hear the seriousness in her voice and they knew something unusual was happening. Ember and Frost immediately came to her side and pressed against her legs, and she could feel the tension in their bodies. And Frost was making a low rumbling sound in her throat that meant she sensed danger approaching, and that made Lyra even more concerned because Frost was never wrong about these things. The unknown object was getting closer every second, and now it was close, enough that the main viewing screen could show it, and when the image appeared, everyone on the bridge went silent and stared, because what they were seeing should not exist. It was a ship, but unlike any ship they had ever seen before, and it was massive, even bigger than the Empire battle cruisers, and it was made of dark metal that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it, and the design was strange and angular and covered in weapons. The ship had none of the elegant curves and artistic details that marked the vessels of the Empire or any of the other known species, and instead it looked rough and practical, like it had been built by someone who cared only about function and power and survival. Luna ran more scans and reported that the ship had energy readings that were off the charts, and the weapons it carried could probably destroy their ship with a single shot and maybe destroy a small planet if they wanted to. And her voice was shaking as she said this. Lyra felt fear creep into her chest, but she pushed it down because she was the captain, and her crew needed her to be strong and calm. So she took a deep breath and ordered Luna to send a standard greeting message to the unknown ship and request identification. The message went out across space using all the common frequencies and languages that the Empire used for first contact situations, and then they waited for a response, and the waiting felt like it took forever, even though it was only a few minutes. Ember started pacing back and forth on the bridge, and his claws clicked on the metal floor, and Frost kept her eyes locked on the viewing screen and never blinked, and the crew members were whispering to each other nervously. Finally, the communication system made a sound that meant a message was coming in, but when it played through the speakers, it was in a language that the computer did not recognize, and the translation program had to work hard to decode it. After several long seconds, a voice came through. and it was speaking in heavily accented but understandable Empire Common, and the voice belonged to a female, and she sounded confident and maybe a little bit amused. The woman said her name was Patricia Cole, and she was the captain of the Earth ship Starrunner, and she and her crew had come from a planet called Earth, which was very far away in a region of space that the Empire had never explored. She apologized for startling them and said they meant no harm and were simply exploring this area to make contact with other intelligent species and learn about the galaxy, and hopefully make friends and allies. Lyra felt confused because she had never heard of Earth or humans, and neither had the Empire database, which contained information about every known intelligent species in the galaxy, and this should not be possible. She responded and asked Patricia to stop her ship and maintain distance while they figured out what was going on, and Patricia agreed easily, and the massive warship slowed down and came to a stop several thousand kilometers away. The elf captain ordered Luna to send an urgent message to Empire Command and report this first contact situation and request instructions because this was way above her authority level, and the Empire needed to know that there was a new species with advanced technology. While they waited for a response, Lyra studied the human ship on her screen and tried to understand what she was looking at. And the more she looked, the more questions she had, because this ship represented technology that should not exist. The dragons were still nervous, but they had stopped making distressed sounds, and instead they seemed curious and kept sniffing the air as if they could smell the humans through the vacuum of space. Patricia sent another message and asked if they could talk more and maybe exchange information about their peoples. And Lyra hesitated because protocol said she should wait for orders from command, but something in Patricia's voice made her want to say yes. She looked at Luna, and her friend nodded slightly, and then she looked at Ember and Frost, and they both tilted their heads and watched her with their intelligent eyes, and somehow she knew they were telling her it was okay. So Lyra opened a video channel for the first time, and suddenly she was looking at a human face, and Patricia Cole had brown skin and short dark hair and bright eyes that sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. Patricia smiled when she saw Lyra and said it was wonderful to finally see her, and then her eyes went wide when she noticed the dragons, and she made a sound of pure delight and asked if those were real dragons. Lyra found herself smiling, despite the strange situation, and said yes, they were real, and Patricia looked like a child who had just been given the best present ever. And that made the elf captain relax just a little bit. Maybe these humans were not a threat after all, and maybe this was the beginning of something good. Patricia Cole could not believe what she was seeing on her screen, because there in front of her was an actual elf with pointed ears and silver hair and pale skin that seemed to glow with its own light. And beside the elf were two creatures that looked exactly like the dragons from Earth legends and myths. She had been the captain of the Starrunner for 5 years, and she had led her crew through dangerous situations and close calls, and they had explored dozens of empty star systems hoping to find intelligent life, and now finally they had found it, and it was more amazing than anything she had imagined. Her first officer, whose name was Amanda Bailey, stood next to her chair and stared at the screen with her mouth open, and behind them the rest of the bridge crew had stopped working and were all watching and whispering excitedly to each other. The Starrunner was Earth's first deep space exploration vessel, and it had taken 20 years to build, and it carried the hopes and dreams of all humanity. Because people wanted to know if they were alone in the universe, and now they had their answer. Patricia had been chosen to lead this mission because she was calm under pressure and good at making quick decisions, and she had a talent for understanding other cultures, even human ones that were very different from her own, and Command thought these skills would be useful if they met aliens. She studied the elf on the screen and noticed that despite her calm expression, the elf captain was nervous and probably scared because a huge unknown warship had just appeared in her territory, and Patricia understood that fear because she would feel the same way. The elf had introduced herself as Captain Lyra of the Silver Wind, and she served something called the Galactic Empire, and Patricia felt excited because that meant there was not just one alien species, but many, and they had formed a government that spanned multiple worlds. Lyra asked questions about Earth and humans and where they came from, and Patricia answered honestly and explained that Earth was located in a region of space that was apparently far from Empire territory, and humans had only recently developed faster than light travel. She could see that Lyra found this hard to believe because the Star Runner was clearly very advanced and carried weapons that the elf seemed to respect, and Patricia knew she had to be careful about how much information she shared. The truth was that humans had developed their technology very quickly because they had a history of constant warfare and competition, and every nation on Earth had raced to build better weapons and ships, and that drive had pushed human science forward at incredible speed. But Patricia did not want to scare Lyra by talking too much about human conflicts and wars. So instead, she focused on the fact that humanity had finally united and was now exploring space peacefully. And looking for friends, Lyra seemed skeptical but willing to listen. And Patricia appreciated that, because it showed the elf was smart and cautious. And those were good qualities in a captain, and someone Patricia might be able to work with. Then Patricia noticed movement on the screen and saw the dragons more clearly, and they were magnificent with scales that gleamed and eyes that looked intelligent and aware, and she could not help but express her wonder and excitement. Lyra seemed surprised by Patricia's reaction and explained that most species in the galaxy were afraid of dragons and avoided them when possible. But Patricia said that humans loved dragons and had stories about them going back thousands of years even, though they thought dragons were just fantasy. The elf captain looked at her dragons with obvious affection and said their names were Ember and Frost, and they had been with her for over a century and were her closest companions and protectors and could sense danger before it arrived. Patricia asked if dragons were common in the Empire, and Lyra said no. They were very rare, and came from a world that had been destroyed long ago, and only a few survived, and most of them chose to live alone away from other species. As they talked, Patricia crew was working quietly in the background and running scans of the silver wind and the surrounding space, and gathering as much data as possible about this first contact situation, because Earth government would want detailed reports. Amanda leaned close and whispered that the elf ship had impressive shielding and weapons, but was much smaller than the Star Runner, and probably could not win in a fight. But Patricia whispered back that fighting was the last thing they wanted to do. She asked Lyra if they could meet in person to talk more and maybe start building a relationship between their peoples, and Lyra hesitated and said she needed to contact her commanders first and ask for permission. Patricia understood and said she would wait, and in the meantime she would stay where she was and not make any threatening moves. And Lyra seemed to appreciate this and ended the video call to send her report. The human captain sat back in her chair and let out a long breath, and Amanda smiled at her and said that went well, all things considered, and Patricia agreed, but said the hard part was just beginning. She called a meeting with her senior officers, and they gathered in the conference room, which had a large table and screens on the walls, and everyone looked excited and nervous at the same time. Nicole Torres was the chief science officer, and she was practically bouncing in her seat with enthusiasm, and she said this was the greatest discovery in human history, and they needed to learn everything they could about the Empire and its technology. Lisa Grant was the head of security, and she was more cautious and said they should be careful because they did not know if the Empire was friendly or hostile, and the fact that Lyra had weapons and shields meant the Empire had enemies and was used to fighting. Heather Mills was the chief engineer, and she said she was impressed by what the scanners had picked up from the silver wind, and the ship used some kind of energy source that human science did not fully understand, and she wanted to study it. Patricia listened to everyone, and then said they would proceed carefully and follow first contact protocols and treat the Empire with respect and friendship, but also be ready to defend themselves if necessary. Amanda suggested they prepare gifts to give to Lyra and her crew as a sign of goodwill, and Patricia thought that was an excellent idea and asked what they should give, and the officers all had different suggestions. They decided on a collection of Earth items including books and music and art and samples of Earth food and drink, and a detailed star map showing where Earth was located, and information about human history and culture. While they prepared these gifts, Patricia went back to the bridge and waited for Lyra to contact her again. And she looked out at the stars and thought about how amazing it was that humans were no longer alone. Several hours passed, and then finally, Lyra's face appeared on the screen again, and she looked tired but determined. And she said she had received permission from her commanders to meet with Patricia in person. The elf captain suggested they meet on a nearby moon that had breathable atmosphere, and low gravity, and was uninhabited, and both ships could land there safely and maintain distance from each other. Patricia agreed immediately and ordered her crew to prepare a shuttle and select a security team to accompany her, and Amanda insisted on coming along, and so did Nicole, because she wanted to see the dragons up close. They loaded the gifts onto the shuttle and put on their environmental suits just in case, even though the scan said the air was safe, and then they flew down to the moon surface. The moon was covered in red sand and had mountains in the distance and two small suns in the sky that made everything look orange and beautiful, and Patricia felt her heart racing with anticipation. She saw the silver wind landing on the other side of a flat plain, and then a ramp extended down and figures started walking out, and she could see Lyra in front, followed by several crew members, and the two dragons' Patricia crew landed their shuttle and walked out to meet the elves, and the two groups approached each other slowly and carefully, and when they were a few meters apart, everyone stopped and looked at each other. This was the moment when everything would change, and Patricia knew she had to get it right, so she stepped forward and smiled and held out her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Lyra looked at the hand for a moment and then reached out and took it, and they shook hands, and Patricia felt the elf fingers were cool and smooth and strong. She said it was an honor to meet Lyra and her crew, and she hoped this was the beginning of a long friendship between humans and the Empire, and Lyra smiled slightly and said she hoped so too. Then Ember and Frost came forward and sniffed at Patricia, and she stood, very still, and let them, and when Ember pushed his nose against her, she laughed with joy and carefully touched his scales, and they were warm and felt like smooth stone. The dragons seemed to like her, and that made Lyra visibly relax. And the tension that had been in the air started to fade away, and both groups began to talk and ask questions. The meeting on the moon lasted for hours, and both groups found that despite being completely different species from worlds that were thousands of light years apart, they could understand each other and even laugh together and share stories about their lives. Patricia told Lyra about Earth and how it was a beautiful blue and green world with vast oceans and high mountains and dense forests and deserts and frozen poles and billions of humans living in cities and towns and villages. She explained that humanity had almost destroyed itself in wars over resources and territory and religion and ideology, but somehow they had learned to work together and had formed a united government that represented all nations and peoples. Lyra listened carefully and asked if humans still fought each other, and Patricia admitted that yes, sometimes there were conflicts, but nothing like the terrible wars of the past, and most disputes were now settled through talking and negotiation. The elf captain seemed to understand because she said the Empire had a similar history, and many of the species that now lived together peacefully had once been enemies, who fought brutal wars until they realized cooperation was better than destruction. She told Patricia about the Empire, which included dozens of intelligent species spread across hundreds of worlds, and they had formed an alliance based on trade and mutual defense and shared knowledge, and most importantly, respect for differences. Patricia asked about the dragons, and Lyra's face softened, and she looked at Ember and Frost with obvious love and said they came from a world called Draconus, which had been destroyed by a cosmic disaster. When a nearby star went supernova, most of the dragons had died in the explosion, but a few ships managed to escape carrying dragon eggs, and those eggs were scattered across the galaxy, and Lyra had found 2 of them on an abandoned station when she was young. She had raised them from babies, and they had bonded with her in a way that was deeper than friendship or family, and they could sense each other's emotions and thoughts across great distances and would die to protect each other. Nicole, who had been listening intently, asked if she could study the dragons with their permission, of course, and Lyra looked hesitant. But Ember walked over to Nicole and sniffed her, and then made a rumbling sound that Lyra said meant he approved. The elf captain smiled and said Nicole could take some scans, but nothing invasive, and Nicole agreed eagerly and pulled out her portable scanner and started taking readings while talking softly to Ember, who seemed to enjoy the attention. Meanwhile, Amanda and Lisa were talking with Luna and the other elf crew members, and they were comparing notes about their ships and technology, and sharing pictures and videos from their home worlds. Heather, the engineer, was having an animated discussion with the Zinthar engineer, whose name was Crix, and he had 4 arms and blue skin, and spoke in a buzzing voice, and they were drawing diagrams in the sand trying to explain their different engine designs. Patricia watched all this and felt hope growing in her chest, because this was going well much better than anyone had expected, and maybe humans and the Empire could truly become allies and friends. She asked Lyra what would happen next, and the elf captain said she had to make a full report to Empire Command and they would send representatives to meet with Earth government and establish formal diplomatic relations. Patricia said that would take time because Earth was far away and communication would be slow, but she had been given authority to negotiate preliminary agreements, and maybe they could work something out right now. They discussed various possibilities, including setting up a communication relay system between human and Empire space, and arranging for cultural exchanges where people from each side could visit and learn about the other. Lyra suggested that Patricia and her crew could come to the Empire capital, world, and meet with the High Council and present humanity case for joining the galactic community, and Patricia thought that was an excellent idea. But then Lisa raised a concern and asked what would happen if the Empire had enemies who might see humanity as a threat or a target. And Lyra's expression became serious, and she admitted that yes, the Empire did have enemies. The biggest threat came from something called the Void Collective, which was a group of machine intelligences that wanted to eliminate all organic life, and they controlled a large section of space on the far side of the Empire. There were also various pirate groups and rogue factions, and a few species that refused to join the Empire and sometimes raided border worlds. But overall, the galaxy was relatively peaceful. Patricia felt worried because she had not expected to hear about hostile machines and pirates, but she tried not to show it and said humanity had experience fighting difficult enemies and could defend themselves if necessary. Lyra looked at the Star Runner, which was visible in the sky above them, and said she believed that because the human ship was clearly designed for combat and had weapons that could match anything the Empire had. She asked how humans had developed such advanced technology so quickly, and Patricia hesitated because she knew the answer might not make humans look good, but she decided honesty was important. She explained that human history was full of conflict and competition, and that drove rapid innovation because every nation wanted to have better technology than their rivals, and the space race and arms race had pushed science forward incredibly fast. After humans united, they took all that knowledge and expertise and focused it on peaceful exploration instead of war. But the technology was still the same, and the Star Runner was built using designs that originally came from military research. Lyra was quiet for a moment, and then said that actually made sense, because the Empire had a similar history, and many of their best technologies came from ancient wars and conflicts. And maybe all intelligent species went through such periods. Patricia felt relieved that Lyra understood and was not judging humanity too harshly, and she asked what the elf thought of humans so far, and Lyra smiled and said she found them interesting and brave and refreshingly direct. The elf captain said most Empire species were very formal and followed strict protocols and rarely showed emotions, but humans seemed to say what they thought and showed their feelings openly, and that was unusual but not bad. They talked more about their cultures and governments and beliefs, and Patricia was fascinated to learn that elves could live for thousands of years while humans rarely reached 100, and that made her feel sad because life seemed so short. But Lyra said, humans should not feel bad because length of life mattered less than what you did with the time you had, and humans seemed to pack a lot of living into their short years. As the suns began to set and the sky turned purple and gold, both captains realized they had been talking for most of the day, and their crews were getting tired, but neither wanted to stop because this conversation was too important. Finally, Amanda came over and quietly reminded Patricia that they needed to get back to the ship and file their reports, and Patricia reluctantly agreed and told Lyra they should probably end this meeting. The elf captain looked disappointed but nodded and said they should definitely meet again soon and continue this discussion, and maybe next time they could arrange for more crew members to interact. Patricia suggested that some of her crew could visit the Silver Wind, and some of Lyra's crew could visit the Star Runner, and they could give each other tours and share meals and really get to know each other. Lyra liked this idea and said she would make it happen, and then she did something that surprised Patricia by reaching out and hugging her in the human way. And Patricia hugged her back and felt the elf was much stronger than she looked. Ember and Frost came over, and both dragons touched Patricia with their noses, and she felt honored because Lyra had explained earlier that this was how dragons showed acceptance and friendship. Nicole gave Lyra a datapad that contained all the information about Earth and human culture that they had prepared, and Lyra gave Patricia a similar device with information about the Empire. They also exchanged coordinates and communication frequencies so they could stay in contact, and agreed to meet again in 1 week at the same location. As the two groups walked back to their ships, Patricia looked back and saw Lyra watching her, and she waved and the elf captain waved back, and then Patricia climbed into the shuttle feeling happier than she had in years. On the flight back to the Star Runner, Amanda said that went incredibly well, and Nicole was already analyzing the dragon scans and muttering about impossible biology. And Lisa admitted she had been wrong to worry so much. Patricia sat in her seat and looked out the window at the silver wind, lifting off from the moon surface, and she knew this was just the beginning of something that would change both humanity and the Empire forever. When they reached the Star Runner, she immediately went to her quarters and began writing her report to Earth Command, and she tried to capture everything that had happened, but words seemed inadequate to describe the wonder of meeting another intelligent species. She sent the report knowing it would take weeks to reach Earth, and then weeks more for a reply to come back, and in the meantime she would have to make decisions on her own and hope they were the right ones. 3 days after the first meeting, Lyra received an urgent message from Empire Command, and when she opened it, she felt her heart sink, because the message was not what she had hoped for, and it contained orders that would make the situation with the humans much more complicated. The High Council had reviewed her reports, and they were concerned about these newcomers who had appeared from unknown space, with advanced weapons and technology, and no record in any Empire database, and the Council wanted more information before making any decisions. Lyra was ordered to keep the humans in this area and prevent them from traveling deeper into Empire territory until a proper assessment could be made, and a diplomatic team would arrive in 2 weeks to evaluate the situation. She understood the Council concerns because they had to be careful and protect the Empire from potential threats, but she also knew this would upset Patricia and the other humans who probably wanted to explore and see more of the galaxy. When she contacted Patricia to explain the situation, the human captain face showed disappointment, but also understanding, and she said she would comply with the Empire wishes and wait for the diplomatic team to arrive. Patricia asked if they could still meet and spend time together. While they waited, and Lyra checked with command and got permission as long as they stayed in the border zone and did not share sensitive military information. Over the next several days, the two crews visited back and forth and learned about each other, and formed friendships that crossed the boundaries of species and culture, and everyone involved felt like they were part of something historic. Nicole spent hours studying the dragons with Lyra's permission, and she discovered that their biology was incredibly complex, and they had organs that humans did not even have names for, and their scales could absorb and store energy from multiple sources. Ember seemed to enjoy being studied and would pose for the scanners and make pleased sounds when Nicole praised him, and Frost was more reserved but allowed the examination because she trusted that Lyra approved. Heather and Crix became good friends despite the language barrier and communication difficulties, and they worked together to design a hybrid power system that combined human and Empire technology and produced better results than either alone. Amanda and Luna discovered they both loved strategy games and spent their free time playing various games from their respective cultures and keeping score, and the competition was fierce but friendly. Lisa organized joint training exercises where human and elf security teams practiced together and learned each other fighting styles and tactics, and everyone was impressed by how capable both sides were. Patricia and Lyra spent most of their time together talking about leadership and responsibility and the challenges of command, and they found they had similar philosophies even though they came from very different backgrounds. The elf captain was amazed by how much humans could accomplish in their short lives and how they seemed to burn with intensity and passion for everything they did, whether it was work or play or relationships. Patricia was fascinated by elf culture and their long view of time and how they could be patient and wait decades or centuries for things to develop while humans always wanted immediate results. One day they were sitting in the observation deck of the Silver Wind watching the stars, and Lyra asked Patricia what humans wanted from the galaxy and what their goals were for the future. Patricia thought carefully before answering and said humans wanted to learn and grow, and find their place among the other intelligent species, and prove that despite their violent history, they could be trusted, friends and allies. She admitted that some humans wanted to expand and colonize new worlds and build an empire of their own. But most people just wanted peace and prosperity, and the chance to see amazing things. Lyra said she understood those desires, because they were universal and not unique to humans, and every species in the empire had similar goals and dreams, and that was what held them together. The elf captain then asked a harder question, which was what humans would do if the empire rejected them and refused to allow contact, and Patricia did not have a good answer right away. She finally said that humans would respect the empire decision, but would be deeply disappointed and would probably continue exploring in other directions and hope to find species who were more welcoming. But she also said honestly that some human factions might not accept rejection so easily and might try to force contact or establish relations through less official channels, and that could lead to problems. Lyra appreciated the honesty and said she would make sure the High Council understood that humans were not going to just disappear, and that the Empire needed to find a way to work with them. On the 5th day, something happened that changed everything and brought the two species closer together in a way that no amount of talking could have achieved. The silver wind sensors detected a distress signal coming from a nearby system, and when Lyra checked the coordinates, she saw it was from an empire colony world that had a small population of mixed species. She immediately contacted Patricia and told her about the situation and said she had to go investigate, and Patricia, without hesitation, said the Star Runner would come too and help. However, they could. Lyra started to say that command might not approve, but Patricia interrupted and said lives were at stake and approvals could wait, and they were going whether the Empire liked it or not, and Lyra found herself agreeing. The two ships jumped to faster than light speed and arrived at the colony world within an hour, and what they found was a scene of chaos and destruction. A pirate fleet had attacked the colony and was raiding the settlements and stealing supplies and capturing people to sell as slaves, and the colonists were fighting back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Lyra immediately moved the Silver Wind into position and began engaging the pirate ships, and her crew fought with skill and determination, and Ember and Frost flew out of the ship to attack the enemy directly. Patricia brought the Star Runner in on the other side and opened fire with weapons that made the pirate ships explode in brilliant flashes of light, and the human targeting systems were so accurate that every shot hit its mark. The pirates were caught completely by surprise because they had not expected any resistance, and certainly not from two powerful warships, and they tried to flee. But Lyra and Patricia coordinated their attacks and cut off all escape routes. Within 20 minutes, the battle was over and half the pirate ships were destroyed, and the rest were damaged and surrendering and begging for mercy and asking to be taken prisoner. Lyra ordered her crew to secure the prisoners, and Patricia sent down shuttles with medical teams to help the wounded colonists, and both captains met on the planet's surface to assess the damage. The colony governor, whose name was Thara, came to thank them, and she was a tall insectoid, being with multiple eyes, and she said they had been about to be overrun when the two ships arrived. She looked at Patricia and asked what species she was because she did not recognize humans, and Patricia explained briefly, and Thara said she did not care what species anyone was because they had saved lives today, and that was all that mattered. The colonists gathered around to see the humans, and they were curious and grateful, and some of them had never seen a species from outside the Empire before, and they asked many questions. Children came to look at the dragons, and Ember and Frost were gentle with them and let them touch their scales and take pictures, and Lyra had never seen her dragons so patient and calm. Patricia crew worked alongside the elf crew to repair damaged buildings and provide food and medicine and treat injuries, and everyone worked together without any problems or conflicts. That night there was a celebration in the main colony hall, and both crews were invited, and the colonists prepared food from a dozen different worlds, and there was music and dancing and joy. Patricia sat with Lyra, and they watched their crews mingling and laughing and sharing stories, and the elf captain said this was what the galaxy should be like, with different species working together and helping each other. The human captain agreed and said she was glad they had come and been able to help, and maybe this would show the Empire that humans could be good allies and trusted friends. Lyra squeezed Patricia's hand and said she would make sure the High Council heard about what happened today, and how humans had risked their ship and crew to help Empire citizens without asking for anything in return. The next morning, when they were preparing to leave, Governor Thera came to say goodbye, and she gave them both medals of honor from the colony and said they would never forget what had been done for them. She also said she would send her own report to the High Council recommending that humans be accepted as friends of the Empire and given full diplomatic status as the two ships left the planet and jumped back to the border zone. Patricia felt confident that things would work out and that humanity would find its place among the stars. Lyra felt the same way, and she knew that no matter what the Council decided, she had made a friend for life, and that was worth more than any official treaty. 2 weeks after the colony rescue, the diplomatic team from Empire Command arrived in 3 large ships that were decorated with symbols of peace and authority, and Lyra felt nervous because the fate of human and Empire relations would be decided in the coming days. The team was led by Ambassador Vorin, who was a being made of living crystal that reflected light in rainbow patterns, and he had served the Empire for over 5,000 years and had negotiated treaties with dozens of species. Vorin came aboard the Silver Wind and met with Lyra first, and she gave him a complete report of everything that had happened, including the rescue of the colony, and how well humans had performed and how trustworthy they seemed. The ambassador listened carefully and asked many questions about human technology and culture and intentions, and Lyra answered honestly and emphasized that she believed humans would make excellent allies. Then Vorin asked to meet with Patricia, and the human captain came over from the Star Runner with her senior officers, and they gathered in the conference room, which suddenly felt very small and crowded. The crystal ambassador studied the humans with his many-faceted eyes, and then spoke in a voice that sounded like musical chimes and said he was pleased to meet them and looked forward to learning about their species. Patricia responded politely and said, "Humans were honored to meet the Empire and hope to establish friendly relations and contribute to the galactic community in positive ways." Vorin asked about Earth and human history and government, and Patricia told him everything, including the difficult parts about wars and conflicts and environmental damage and social problems. The ambassador did not seem shocked or judgmental and said every species had a troubled past, and what mattered was whether they learned from their mistakes and tried to be better. He then asked the hard questions that Lyra had expected about human intentions and what they wanted from the Empire, and whether they posed a security threat. Patricia answered carefully and said humans wanted trade and knowledge and friendship and a chance to prove themselves, but they also wanted to maintain their independence and not be controlled by others. She explained that Earth had many different cultures and governments and opinions, and while she represented humanity in this meeting, she could not speak for every human or guarantee what all humans would do. Vorin seemed to appreciate this honesty and said that was true of all species, and the Empire itself had many internal disagreements and factions, and diversity of thought was considered a strength, not a weakness. The discussions continued for 3 days and covered every possible topic, from technology sharing to territorial boundaries to cultural exchanges to defense agreements, and Patricia was exhausted, but refused to show it. Amanda and Nicole and Lisa and Heather all took turns answering questions about our respective areas of expertise, and they impressed the diplomatic team with their knowledge and professionalism. Meanwhile, Lyra was working behind the scenes to build support for the humans among the other Empire representatives, and she talked to each one individually and convinced them that humanity deserved a chance. On the 4th day, Vorin called a final meeting and announced that he had made his decision and would recommend to the High Council that humans be granted provisional friendship status with the Empire. This meant that Earth would be recognized as a sovereign power, and humans would be allowed to travel in Empire space and establish embassies and engage in trade and cultural exchanges. However, full membership in the Empire would require more time and evaluation, and humanity would need to prove themselves over several years before being considered for complete integration. Patricia accepted these terms gratefully and said humanity would work hard to earn the Empire trust and be worthy of full membership when the time came. Vorin said he was impressed by human courage and adaptability, and he believed they would indeed make fine addition to the galactic community, and he looked forward to seeing what they would accomplish. After the meeting ended, Lyra and Patricia went to the observation deck and sat together in silence for a long time, just watching the stars and processing everything that had happened. The elf captain finally spoke and said she was happy with the outcome and proud of what they had achieved together, and grateful to have met Patricia. And the other humans, Patricia smiled and said she felt the same way, and this whole experience had exceeded her wildest dreams, and she could not wait to go back to Earth and tell everyone about the Empire and the galaxy. She asked Lyra if she would come to Earth someday and meet human leaders and see where humanity came from, and Lyra said she would love to, and maybe she could bring Ember and Frost. The human captain laughed and said, Earth would go crazy over real dragons and they would be the most famous beings on the planet, and Lyra said that might be fun for a while. They talked about future plans and possibilities and both agreed they should stay in contact and continue working together and maybe even become official liaisons between their peoples. Amanda came to find them and said the Empire diplomatic team was preparing to leave and wanted to say goodbye, and Patricia and Lyra went to see them offer in, took Patricia's hands in his crystalline appendages and said she had represented her species well, and he hoped they would meet again under happier circumstances, and Patricia said she hoped so too. After the diplomats left, Lyra announced that she had received new orders from command and she was being reassigned to a position at Empire headquarters, where she would work on establishing formal relations with Earth. Patricia was overjoyed, because this meant they would continue to see each other and work together, and she said this was the best possible outcome. The human captain also revealed that she had been given permission to stay in Empire space for several more months to serve as Earth's first official representative until a proper embassy could be established. Over the following weeks, they traveled together to the Empire capital world, which was called Unity, and it was the most amazing place Patricia had ever seen, with buildings that reached into the clouds and parks that were filled with species from across the galaxy. The High Council met with Patricia formally and welcomed humanity to the galactic community and gave her a crystal that symbolized friendship and trust, and she accepted it with tears in her eyes. She met dozens of different species and learned about their cultures and histories and struggles and triumphs, and every conversation made her more excited about humanity. Future among the stars. Nicole was invited to join the Empire Science Academy and share human knowledge about physics and engineering, and she accepted eagerly and said this was better than any dream she had ever had. Heather was offered a position working with the best engineers in the galaxy to develop new propulsion systems, and she could hardly believe her luck and said yes immediately. Amanda and Lisa and the other crew members all found ways to contribute and connect with Empire citizens, and everyone felt like they had found a second home. But for Patricia, the best part was her friendship with Lyra and the time they spent together exploring Unity and having long conversations about everything and nothing. One evening, they were sitting on a balcony overlooking the city and watching 3 moons rise over the horizon, and Lyra said she had been thinking about fate and destiny, and whether they were real. Patricia asked what she meant, and the elf said that, out of all the countless stars in the galaxy, she and Patricia had found each other and become friends, and that seemed too unlikely to be pure chance. The human captain said maybe it was not chance but inevitability, because the universe wanted different species to meet and learn from each other and grow together. Lyra smiled and said that was a very human way of thinking, but she liked it, and maybe Patricia was right and this was meant to happen. Ember and Frost were sleeping nearby and they looked peaceful and content, and Patricia watched them and felt grateful for everything that had brought her to this moment. She thought about Earth and her family and friends back home, and she knew they would be amazed when they heard about everything that had happened and learned that humanity was no longer alone. Messages had been sent to Earth weeks ago, and replies were starting to come back, and the response was overwhelming joy and excitement and some fear, but mostly hope for the future. The Earth government was already preparing to send more ships and diplomats and scientists to Empire space, and talks were beginning about establishing permanent human settlements on frontier worlds. Patricia knew she would eventually have to go home and report in person about her experiences, but she was not ready yet because there was still so much to see and learn, and Lyra had become like a sister to her, and the idea of saying goodbye made her sad. But the elf assured her that with faster-than-light travel, They could visit each other anytime they wanted, the two captains made a promise to each other that no matter what happened in the future, and no matter how busy they became, they would always stay friends, and always make time for each other. As the moons continued to rise and the city lights began to glow, Patricia felt at peace because she knew she had accomplished something truly important and lasting. She had not just made first contact with an alien species, she had built a bridge between two civilizations and opened a door to infinite possibilities. The future was uncertain and there would be challenges ahead because bringing different species together was never easy, and there would be misunderstandings and conflicts and disagreements. But Patricia believed that as long as there were people like Lyra who were willing to see past differences and focus on what united them, rather than what divided them, then everything would work out. Humanity had finally found its place among the stars, and the journey was just beginning, and Patricia could not wait to see where it would lead and what amazing things would happen next. She looked at Lyra and smiled, and the elf smiled back, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the beautiful alien city and dreaming about tomorrow.